Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into an incredibly complex and heavily layered debate unfolding right now in Jammu and Kashmir. We're talking about the government's highly aggressive new anti-drug initiative known as the Nasha Mukt Jammu and Kashmir Abhiyan. Look, on the surface, the end goal is something absolutely everyone agrees on, right? Eradicating the devastating impact of drug abuse. But, as our source material reveals, the intense methods being used to get there, well, they've ignited a massive debate touching on medicine, constitutional law, and even some deep cultural hypocrisy.
Okay, let's dive into this roadmap. We're going to cover 5 main areas today. First, the Iron Fist campaign. Second, looking at addiction as a disease, not a crime. Third, bulldozers and due process. Fourth, the liquor contradiction. And finally, Section 5, health or counterinsurgency.
Section 1, the Iron Fist campaign, a sweeping crackdown in the valley. Like I said, literally no one disputes that the drug crisis is a devastating reality, but the exact methods of this campaign are sparking some intense constitutional debate. To truly understand the sheer scale of this, you just have to look at the government's sweeping actions. Our source literally describes it as pulling no punches. I mean, we're seeing hundreds of arrests under the NDPS Act. We're talking massive, continuous seizures of contraband. Properties are being rapidly attached and straight up demolished. Drugstore licenses are just completely suspended. And get this, the state is even targeting driving licenses and vehicle registrations now. It is a relentless multi-agency offensive. This is, without a doubt, the very definition of an iron fist approach.
So the crucial point is that the core tension here isn't about the destination, it's about the journey. The author frames it like this. The question isn't whether we should fight drugs, but whether a government can actually do so without trampling the very principles that make us a democracy. It's that classic tightrope walk, achieving a totally necessary public goal while preserving our democratic methods. Which leads us directly to this thought-provoking question. Can a severe drug crisis actually be solved without bending the rules of a democracy? To figure that out, the source suggests we kind of need to step back from these highly aggressive policing tactics for a second and really look at the human element right at the center of the crisis.
Moving on to Section 2, addiction. Disease, not crime. The medical perspective. To truly grasp what's happening, the source material urges us to look at the physiological reality of the human beings trapped in it. Let's look at the evolution of substance use. You know, humanity has actually sought out psychoactive escapes for centuries, way back to the ancient cultivation of tobacco, opium, and cannabis. And historically, society punished these addictions strictly as a criminal offense. But today? Well, the global consensus has seen a massive, compassionate shift towards evidence-based medical management.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the modern scientific consensus. Science is unequivocal here. Drug addiction is a chronic, relapsing brain disease. It chemically alters the brain's structure and completely distorts how it processes information. Basically, it's a physiological condition. It is not some moral failing or just a simple lack of willpower. It's an illness, plain and simple.
The author actually synthesizes this whole medical reality into one really powerful argument. Quote, if the person suffering from addiction is a patient, then treating them like a hardened criminal fails both medicine and justice. Across Jammu and Kashmir, you have these rehab programs trying to offer holistic, tailored care, but those efforts are clashing head-on with a system that treats these exact same patients as criminals. Which really forces us to ask, if modern science universally views addiction as an illness, why are executive authorities deploying such aggressive, punitive punishments? Well, this disconnect brings us right to the severe legal and constitutional critiques raised by the source material.
That brings us to Section 3, bulldozers and due process, the constitutional debate. This introduces what is probably the absolute most explosive flashpoint of this entire campaign.
Here's the thing about the Indian Constitution. Punishment simply cannot be instant. It has to follow a very specific, legally mandated path to ensure the system is actually fair. Step 1, a thorough investigation. Step 2, due process and a fair trial. And finally, Step 3, a final judicial conviction. It's only after all of that that punitive measures can legally be applied.
But the author argues that taking bulldozers to properties based solely on allegations, that totally bypasses this entire system. It severely risks violating Article 14, which is equality before law, and Article 21, protection of life and personal liberty. Actually, the Supreme Court of India has repeatedly warned against bypassing these exact steps. When you have executive authorities acting as judge, jury, and executioner, Handing out these instant punishments completely outside the criminal justice system, the source argues it deeply undermines basic constitutional safeguards.
And here, the source points out a pretty glaring hypocrisy. Why are these extraordinary, constitution-bending measures used against drug users, but literally never against businesses linked to alcohol?
Let's explore that in Section 4, the liquor contradiction, hypocrisy and state revenue. We're going to look at how the state treats different intoxicants in wildly contradictory ways.
And this brilliantly illustrates the state's double standard. Let's look at the left side, alcohol. It's legally protected, the industry is actually being expanded, and it heavily fills state revenue coffers. This is despite police records strongly linking alcohol to public violence, fatal accidents, and domestic abuse. Now look at the right side, cannabis and illegal drugs. Heavily criminalized and penalized. Users face bulldozers and arrests, even though, as the source notes, these users primarily cause harm to themselves, rarely showing that same outward public aggression.
This contradiction gets even starker when you look at global and cultural realities. Cigarettes and liquor kill millions of people prematurely every single year, but they remain perfectly legal for state profit. Personal liberty usually suggests minimal state interference if you aren't proving harm to others, right? Look at Portugal. They completely decriminalized personal use, and addiction rates actually fell. The US and Canada are increasingly legalizing and regulating cannabis. But then you have the unique cultural reality in Kashmir. Historically, Kashmir culture quietly tolerated cannabis on the fringes, but has always deeply, deeply disapproved of alcohol. So, watching the government forcefully protect alcohol while aggressively crushing the former, it feels incredibly inconsistent with local values.
So, if the true motivation here isn't strictly public health, because let's be real, if it were, alcohol and tobacco would be on the chopping block too, then what is actually driving this incredibly intense crackdown?
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Health or Counterinsurgency, defining the true objective. The author makes a fascinating observation here about the administration's true focus.
Let's move to and see how this builds the author's final argument. They note the administration is treating drug networks with the exact same intensity as active militancy. But a public health campaign and a security crackdown, they operate in completely different universes. Look at the primary goals. A health campaign wants harm reduction and accessible rehab. A security crackdown wants counterinsurgency and choking off funding. In a health framework, the individual is a patient with a right to confidentiality. In a security framework, they are a target for policing and surveillance. Methods used go from medical intervention on one side to asset seizures and intense policing on the other. The source pleads that conflating these two very different frameworks creates a truly dangerous confusion.
So, the author proposes a very clear solution. Be transparent. If this is a national security measure, say so. But even then, you have to strictly separate the two groups. The rigors of the law absolutely must target the cartel bosses and the supply chains, but those vulnerable individuals suffering from addiction, they require medical intervention. The argument is simple. They are victims requiring care, not criminal traffickers.
As we wrap up this explainer, the author leaves us with this incredibly powerful, lingering question. We all know the crisis is genuine, and the urgency is completely understandable. But can a drug-free Jammu and Kashmir be achieved without sacrificing a just one? It's a huge challenge, balancing an urgent crisis with the enduring rule of law. Thank you so much for joining me as we explore the ideas within this source material today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.